Okay, everybody. So here we go. So we're going to continue. We've been talking about opposition theory and why God would create Lucifer. Why would an almighty power create something like this? So let's go ahead and catch our breath. This is part 2, and we're going to see where we are. Welcome back to Might Be Manic. I'm Mackenzie. Okay, so we started with the troubling notion that God has an enemy and ask why that would be. And we heard the classic free will defense that God didn't want mindless doors, so he gave us freedom with the risk that comes with it. And we heard the greater good defense. The opposition sets the stage for redemption and heroism, making the story richer. And then we dove deeper into the waters and the idea that opposites are fundamental to existence, that even God might have a shadow for the sake of dynamic creation, right? So we looked at the mystical traditions already, and we see the devil as not as a monster of the outside, but kind of a part of God's divine plan, and as an integral piece of the puzzle, even a tool for transformation. Because if we couldn't be tempted, how would we know? Like, how could we pass? He has to be there. And you know what I find interesting as his right hand man? When I was thinking of titles for this podcast, one of them was The Fall Was Not a Punishment, but a Promotion. For all we know, Lucifer could have been made the VP when he got kicked out. He's like, hey, I'm going to give you the most important job of all. You're going to bring him back, right? And maybe, because sometimes I've asked myself, like, why would God be okay with sending us into eternal hellfire, right? Which, the floods and the things, I mean, it's not like he's not scared, he don't push his hand. But the thing about it is, maybe, what if we found out that wasn't even there? Like, that was never going to happen. He was going to lead you back all along. I don't know. Okay. So what if we string all the pearls together? What picture comes out? What emerges? So maybe it looks like this. So in the beginning, the absolute, which is God, the universe, cosmos, whatever you want to call it, almighty higher power, was one, alone. He was everything, all that is, all that ever has been, and all that ever will be, right? But for anything to happen, that oneness expressed itself in duality, like many of us, all of us do. And light and dark was there, heaven and earth was there, and then there was good and quote unquote not good, right? The opposite of good. So it's like white light splitting into a spectrum of colors. You need contrast to see the colors. Like I was told once, and I believe this is accurate, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you look at something and it looks yellow to you, that's because it's actually every color except yellow. So your eyes are registering yellow because everything else is projecting into your eyes farther than you can see. Just like, you can't see germs. It's like that. Just like everything is made of matter. Some is just made of more dense matter than others. Thus, the possibility of Satan or Lucifer, which is the opposing force, obviously, of good, the opposite, was born the moment God said, let there be light. Because if there's light, that means there was an absence of light before. So maybe he didn't create Lucifer. Maybe he just said, let there be light. And in a universe where there's universal law, polarity being one of those laws, duality being something the universe appreciates, the minute he said, let there be light, became darkness. Because there has to be. That's like saying, let there be up, but there's no down. You can't have it that way. It just can't be. So maybe God's perceived opposition might be less like a rival, maybe he deliberately forged and more like it's his reflection in a very large, very strange funhouse mirror. One necessary for the story of the universe to even unfold, okay? So the mirror shows God's opposite, not because God is evil, never, but because to create something truly distinct from himself, he has to allow there to be other. There's got to be miscellaneous. There's got to be dark matter. There's got to be dark water. It has to be there. You can't say left and have there not be a right. Because where were you before then? And, he may even have to create something with an anti-God stance. Maybe. The mirror shows God's opposite, not because, of evil. Without otherness, there's no relationship. And God, it seems, is interested in the relationship because he's a jealous God. Between, creator and creature, he wants to have that bond between love and the beloved. So, the shepherd needs lost sheep. But in order for that, the sheep have to be lost. So no one writes a love story where the beloved is a puppet that can't choose otherwise. There's never a love story where it's like, there's only one man on earth. And so there was one girl on earth. And it's romantic because they picked each other. Like, there's no one else to pick. The tension, the near loss, the reunion, the conflict, the climax is what makes the love story interesting and fun to watch. The ride there is the trip. The destination is the destination. Most of life is the journey. Most of it. When you get where you're going is when it's, say a couple, okay? So, Perhaps God allowed an adversary so that the return of all things to goodness would be a triumphant love story instead of a static utopia. And it's often said in storytelling that no conflict, no plot, right? Anyone who writes knows if there's not a an issue for the protagonist to get over, where's the story? And how can you have a protagonist without an antagonist? Protagonist of what? You know what I'm saying? Loving character, okay, but of what? There's no, they didn't face any adversarial anything. They didn't conquer. If you don't have anything to conquer, can you still be a hero? A hero of what? What's a king with no kingdom? So in a sense, God introduced conflict to potentially make disharmony, to give the potential for disharmony, not to create it, to leave space for it, because it's inevitable. Because he knew where there was light, there would be places where it didn't reach. And, instead of just being pampered like pets in a zoo of perfection, now things can truly be learned, we can change, and we can freely unite with the divine and have a true personalized relationship with him. If each of us goes through different struggles, he gets to have a different bond with each of us that he wouldn't have had us just been down here living in pure paradise. And it's just like we said before, why would there be a tree that God doesn't want us to pick from in the center of everything? It's like if I don't want my kids to eat some candy, right? I'm not going to put a bunch of salads on the kitchen table and put a Butterfinger in the middle of the table and say, oh, you can eat everything here, but don't touch that. Don't do it. Because what's that going to do? Even leaving temptation, leaving breadcrumbs, it almost shows that he does want us to be changing beings. He wants us to learn. Because why would you put it there? Why even put it there at all? Okay? So, literature is full of this idea, no conflict, no plot. And in J.R.R. Tolkien's mythology, the evil Margoth's discordant music inadvertently leads to a richer, more complex symphony in the creation of the world, if you're familiar with this. And in the Christian New Testament, there's a verse saying, all things work together for good for those who love God. So God makes all things work together for our good, okay? There's a really good song called Your Love Never Fails by Jesus Culture. And while I'm not religious, it's a very, very good song. And it says this also. And, it's implying that bad things get alchemized in the divine plan. And that is true. Like, there's been times when I've gone through things that a breakup I went through once. I haven't had a lot of relationships, but I've had a couple. And I used to pray like that I would find the reason this happened to me. That someday I'd be grateful. And at the time, it felt painful. But looking back now, it was one of the better things that happened to me because I wouldn't have let that go. But in order for there to be room for growth, there had to be room for loss. And so now when I lose something, bad or big that I feel at the time perceived as a big thing to lose, I tell myself God must be getting ready to give me something huge because he's making a lot of room. Because there has to be loss to be gain. You can't be a winner if there's not a loser. And, it's as if God wrote the devil a secret contract. Like, go ahead and do your worst, Ali. Go down there, use everything you can, and you'll still end up serving my purposes. No matter what the devil can do. It's like, even when you try your hardest, you do your nastiest on us, right? It's going to benefit God in the end because it's going to come full circle. What goes down must go up. You throw a ball up in the air, it's going to come back down. And either way, in the end, it will bring us closer to God because when people go through bad times, it seems they pray more. And I've always tried to teach my kids, pray when things are good. Sometimes praying to say thank you. More than you praying, when you want to pass a test or when you're afraid or when you are, in a situation. Because, those friends that only call you when they need something, right? There has to be balance. Everything in life has to have balance. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people only pray when bad things happen. And being as it's that way, that means if there was no devil, a lot of us would never talk to God. And then how would he get you back? Because God is possessive and he wants everyone back. And he wouldn't be able to do that without showing us that we need him. You understand? When you think of it like that, what if at the end of everything we found out there was no bad? All these perceived bad days, bad moments and all that, it was like, it's him and his homie. Like, come on, let's bring him home. Let's try it. Let's see who can, throw a banana peel in their way. Like, what if we found out it was never that serious? It was never that serious. You were always coming home. Because at the end of the day, the more you entertain this idea, the more it would seem that way. Like, am I getting punked? Is this all not real? Did Lucifer really fall? Or did he toss him down here on a contract, on an assignment? Is he on a mission? Are we all on a mission? Or does the devil not even exist? Is that just people trying to make an excuse for the fact that they have disgusting thoughts in bad ways? Because what if there isn't one? What if someone one day was being really mean? And they were like, it's not me. It's easier to whisper temptation, the devil, than it is to whisper, that was my choice. Because a lot of people want to see the good in themselves. So who knows how much of it the devil's even responsible for? Because people might just have bad tendencies. There's that question, the age-old question, are people inherently evil or good? Are we naturally bad and we're trying to get better, or are we naturally good and we get worse? Are we born pure with no bad thoughts? Because, they say babies don't have any wants, only needs. When do we decide we start having needs, and when do those needs become skewed and selfish? If God said, go ahead and do your worst to Lucifer and toss him down here, if that's true, then the devil isn't so much his ultimate mistake, but he's his number one servant. He's his administrative assistant. He's his right-hand man. He's his wingman and the catalyst for growth and redemption. So he's actually down here doing us a favor in the form of pain and anguish. So what in life would be considered bad? And then let's push this even further, because we promised that we'd wade into the deep end. So consider this. What if God and Satan are not two at war, but a story that we as humans use to describe a more complex truth about reality? So notice that in many myths outside the Abrahamic world, the line between God and adversaries is completely blurred. In Hindu mythology, for example, the gods, which is devas, and the demons, asuras, are relatives, often working together in paradoxical ways, like churning the ocean to get nectar of immortality and whatnot. And the play of opposites is often seen as part of the divine Lila, the play of the cosmos. So that's basically, God having a play date with his homeboy. Some Eastern traditions even say that the entire universe is God playing hide and seek with himself. So hiding in forms, even evil ones, perceived by our minds, and then seeking himself again. So what if the figure of Satan is just how our human minds picture the necessary shadow of God in this divine play? And all along, you're actually really having hatred towards the parts of God that don't suit you as well. A Sufi mystic once suggested that Iblis, which is the Islam name for Satan, was in a strange way the biggest monotheist of all, because he refused to bow to anything but God, even though the act of defiance made him false. So in that interpretation, Iblis's apparent opposition is a dark mirror of devotion, basically saying Lucifer is willing to risk it all and do everything wrong that he can possibly do to these divine beings that God created simply because God told him to. And he acts for him. He doesn't work for you, okay? So when we come back, we're going to entertain more information like this about the Gnostics and the Gnostic theory and, symbolically the profound points that they make in their speaking when they come to God allowing himself to face a demon, the cosmic adversary, the supposed Lucifer that we're discussing. So we'll be right back. Okay, so right now we're talking about the Gnostics, okay? So the Gnostics, who we touched on, they flipped the Genesis narrative entirely. So to them, the snake in Eden wasn't a liar, but a liberator, and the God who forbade knowledge wasn't the ultimate God, but a lesser creator, often called Yaldabaoth, who wanted to keep humanity ignorant. So in that telling, what we see as God and the devil in the garden story were actually reversed. So the serpent was wisdom guiding us, and the God walking in the garden was the imposter, an arrogant pretender to the throne. So the opposition in Eden then was actually on the side of the true light, trying to free us from counterfeit paradise. So I'm not asking you to accept Gnostic theology literally, but symbolically. And it makes a profound point. Sometimes when opposition is really service in disguise. So the one who challenges the status quo might be evil from one angle, but a liberator from another, because Lucifer's name literally means light bringer. So if you cast the story of God versus the devil in psychological terms, God could represent order and meaning, while Satan represents chaos and collapse of meaning, yet facing chaos can lead to a stronger and deeper order. So facing meaninglessness can force us to seek a more resilient meaning. We often talk about fighting our demons, but sometimes you meet people who have befriended their demons, and they've learned from their depression and their anger and their trauma and gained wisdom and empathy that they couldn't have gained otherwise. So this doesn't make the demon good in itself, but it means the encounter wasn't in vain. So could it be the entire cosmos is doing that God himself to face a demon, a grand cosmic adversary, so that something precious and hard-won could emerge that even an all-perfect being didn't have before? The experience of journey, of fall and rise, of loss and reunion, in simple terms, the experience of story. So a perfect circle has no story, but break that unity, make that line where it bends and twists, and you have a narrative. So we humans, as meaning-making creatures, might even venture that God created his perceived opposition, because without it, nothing really new could ever happen. And maybe God likes new things. So maybe God, like an artist, wanted to explore every color on the palette, even the messy dark ones, to create a full masterpiece. So what does that mean for you? What is your role? So by now, this might feel immense and personal. All this talk of God and cosmic forces. So let's bring it back to you. So where do you fit into this tale of light and shadow? So the fact that you're listening suggests that something in you resonates with being curious, and the one willing to nibble on the fruit of knowledge to peek behind the curtain. So that impulse to question and to seek is the same impulse that in our myths made Eve reach out and eat the apple, and that made Lucifer say, I will not obey blindly. So it's part of our spiritual DNA, and it's not evil, it's the beginning of consciousness. Each of us has a garden inside, a place of innocence and unity, and inevitably, each of us hears a voice that challenges us to step out of that garden. It might be the voice of ambition or doubt or desire, but something that pushes us into the wider and riskier world. We often label that voice as temptation, the devil on your shoulder, your conscience. But if we never heard it, we never grow up. And we never leave our personal Edens, which could be our comfort zone or our untested beliefs or our childlike dependency. So opposition shows up in, every life. Okay. Whether it's the person who betrays you, the illness that strikes you, or the failure that humbles you, the inner urge that scares you, it could be anything. And we come to see that in a strange way that these oppositional forces actually shape us. So as the saying goes, a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. The enemies and the obstacles call forth our courage, our resilience, our creativity. And so in a very intimate sense, one answer to why did God create his perceived opposition might be to help us become who we're meant to be. Because if we are indeed children of God or fragments of the divine, then our maturation is part of the equation, right? When we grow, parts of him grow. So him putting us through adversarial times grows him because we're parts of him. He's strengthening the muscles and then they're going to come back together. So think of the times when you truly discovered something about yourself. Was it when everything was easier, when you were under pressure, facing conflict? And we often meet our true selves in the struggle at the bottom or in our shadows. And what is true for us, perhaps in some mysterious way, might be true for God as well. So if we poetically imagine God wanting to know himself, then setting up a foil, an antagonist, is a way to draw out the drama, to see love in action rather than love in theory. To see courage tested by fear and loyalty tested by betrayal and then hope tested by despair. So it's the ultimate storytelling technique. And life is nothing if not the greatest story ever told. Okay, so let's talk about embracing the paradox. So at this point, our logical minds throw up our hands. Is the devil bad or good, or what is he? And is opposition something God hates or that he uses or needs? Well, it's both. It's a paradox. So this is where our minds have to kind of expand and it becomes uncomfortable and we have to get comfortable with the fact that it's a mystery that shuts down thought. Just have faith and don't question, but the kind that opens up infinitely and the kind where two seemingly opposing truths can coexist. So God is all good and nothing truly opposes him in ultimate reality. That's one pole. And yet within the story, God allows a real opposition with real stakes and real suffering, and that's the other pole. So both statements are true in different ways. And between them arcs the lightning that illuminates existence. So what can we conclude from all of this? Well, perhaps that God's opponent was never outside of the plan. Whether as a free-willed rebel or a dark aspect of creation or a mirror of self-knowing, the opposition is woven into the fabric of all that is. And we live in a universe where nothing exists in isolation, where meaning arises from differences and reunion. So heaven and hell, psyche and shadow, thesis and antithesis, they all dance. So maybe instead of asking why God created the ops, we should ask, what would a universe be with no ops? And it would be one where nothing ever happened and there was no challenge and no change. So it's hard to imagine such a state, and it might be eternally peaceful but static like a blank page. And we would not be here to talk about it because there'd be no story to tell at all. So the fact that we can even conceive of good and evil, of conflict resolution, and all of that, it means that we're already in the world of duality. So the ops was there from the start, as soon as God said, let there be anything. So maybe God had to create a not God, a space of otherness, in order to fully express all that God is. And that brings us into another thought. If there's a Mackenzie, is there a not Mackenzie? I don't know. So in the space of otherness, some beings wandered far from the light, but as every mystic assures us, not one of those sparks is forever lost. So let's pull back and feel the vastness of the idea, because picture God and his perceived opponent, not as two warriors, but as a ring, like two dancers. And in the spotlight, it looks like conflict. One advances and one retreats. One dips, the other lunges, Dodge, dodge. But step back and you see it's like choreography. Each is complementing each other. It's like it's set up that way. So the friction generates the heat and the light of life. So in some myths, the dance of Shiva, which is creation and destruction, is how the world keeps turning. So in our myth, perhaps the dance of Yahweh and Lucifer is what keeps the story of existence unfolding. And here's the twist. So dances are meant to end in harmony, conflicts, and stories resolve. So the hero and the villain either part ways or one is transformed. In the grandest vision, even the devil eventually is redeemed or reabsorbed. After all that he came from, he must return to God because that's where he came from, though it's been a torturous road. So we started with the question, why would God create the ops? Maybe the answer is to love truly, to make freedom real, or to give the story life and become, in the end, more fully himself through the journey of it. It's an answer that raises questions as it settles, but that's the nature of deep truth. It's alive and it unfolds. So now consider what this means for you and your own shadow and your ops. Perhaps the darkest part of your life, the hardest battles you've fought, were not a departure from meaning, but an entry point to go deeper. Maybe your enemies and the struggles you face in the world or in yourself are in your life, not to destroy you, but to break you open and catalyze your growth. So what if you viewed your personal demon as character in your story through conflict, and it teaches you strength? You know, this doesn't make the demon good, but it might make it purposeful. And honestly, this is one of the smartest things I've heard because this is what I had to do for myself. But that's another story for another time. And so basically, we can see humanity's long struggle with the evil as the labor pains of a greater consciousness. So the question, why would God create the ops, draws us to an understanding that's higher. You know, it's empathy and it's resolve to choose the good. So I'm trying to give this answer. So we elevate our perspective closer to God. So in a way, by wrestling with the problem of evil, we're doing the work of God, perhaps intended all along, engaging our full selves, light and shadow, in the pursuit of wisdom and the betterment of all. So does God have an op? On one level, yes, we live in a world of duality and tension. But are your bad habits your ops? And do you see them that way? On another level, all dualities resolve into unity at the end and the highest advantage. So both statements can be true. It is and it isn't. And we, standing here in the middle, get to feel the stretch between them. And that echo in between is life. That echo is life. That is the living part. That's the journey. So maybe, you know, that's the ultimate secret, that God's perceived opposition exists so that the universe can experience the miracle of going from unity to diversity and back to a richer unity. The prodigal son leaves home and eventually returns, and the reunion is better because distance makes a heart grow fonder, and the distance traveled makes a difference. So as we finish, I want to invite you to hold the paradox with reverence because we're almost there, guys. And I think we've come so far. I mean, I feel different. I knew I wanted to talk about this, but when I started researching, it's been like the best thing about doing a podcast is the gift to yourself. Let's go ahead and hold this paradox here. So light and dark, creator and adversary, self and shadow. So rather than give you the easy answer, I'll leave you with an image. So imagine a candle burning in a dark room. The flame is all you can see because it's dark everywhere else. Rather than, make this easy, I'm going to let you decide what you think of this, okay? So they define each other, the night and the candle. In a way, they need each other because without the dark, you couldn't see the candle. But without the candle, you couldn't see at all. So if God's the flame, maybe he set himself a midnight just to shine brighter. You understand? Maybe he turned off the light so you could see how amazing he was. And, he wanted to see his own radiance reflected in the eyes of the people, the creatures who had known darkness, and now they see light. You wouldn't be able to appreciate the light being on if you never saw it was dark. We would have just felt entitled to God's mercy. We would have felt entitled to this place, this planet, and every gift we got, because what else is there? So that leaves us in a place of wonder. So wherever you are, just take a minute and feel the enormity of this because you're part of the story. Perhaps he created the devil simply for you to come home. The question of why God created the ops is, in a sense, the question of why do you struggle with anything? And perhaps the answers are intertwined because there's something magnificent to be achieved through this striving. And in the end, maybe God's opponent was never meant to be permanent. Maybe it's the tension of a question that leads to an answer. It's a temporary division that leads us back to oneness. So God's perceived op exists perhaps so that one day the op can be overcome, not by force, but understanding. And when all creatures freely align with good and the story reaches the climax, the universe that started in harmony ventures into discord and then finds an even greater harmony after the tumultuous part of it. It's a story worth divinity of the author, the only author who could have wrote it, which is God. We remain with the mystery, a fruitful one, and it doesn't paralyze us, it propels us. It calls us to choose love, hate, growth, stagnation, and knowing that everything is a step forward and a step closer to the cosmic tension being history. So why did God create the ops? Maybe so that you and I could one day stare into the darkest abyss and see God looking back at us with eyes full of understanding, so that we could learn to recognize the divine not only by the blaze of noon, but the midnight of the soul, because he's seen darkness, so he can forgive us because he experienced it through all of us. And in order to be able to forgive us, he needs to see it and feel it. And he does that through you and your pain. So this is not a conclusion. This is an open-ended invitation. So live in the question. Go on with the question, because I know this isn't usually what we talk about on here, but I had to do it, you guys. And go ahead and embrace, the opposites in your life. Like them, love them, because that's a lesson. That's a time God's showing you balance. And you can use that in life to get what you want. If you've had this many bad days, you're going to have this many good days. When you have a bad day, know a good day is coming. It has to balance out because that's the law of the universe. So see what awakens you. And as you do, you might feel the faint echo of an answer, not in words, but in the widening of your heart, to open up to the existence of light and shadow in unison. And perhaps that's what the devil is for all along. So if you're starting to feel a little lightheaded, that's not the flu. That's us shifting together. I appreciate you being here with me for this 2-part series on the opposition theory. And I know it's not our usual tone and it was very heavy. But it's fun. I like to talk about real stuff, and I'm so glad that you were here and stuck it out with me as well. So I'm not going to give you anything to spiral on because I think I've given you plenty at this point, but I will see you next weekend. We're going to talk about something else really compelling. And in the meantime, keep your foot on their necks, baby girl. And just for the record, I just might be. You have a good night.